Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are showing off two different builds and two different pace bins as it were for two different path of building trees as well as items and skill setups for two different options that are both prevalent and rather meta defining in some regards in their own particular ascendancies right now in Legion League. And of course, thanks and shout out to everybody that voted on the poll to be involved in determining exactly what discussion we would be having today. So thanks so much to everybody for participating in that. So when thinking about different builds, it's tough to decide which ones to show off and which ones to just let slip through the cracks and which ones aren't going to get featured. And these two particular builds are right away, you can already tell from the timestamps placed above my slightly balding forehead that one of them is going to be a Trickster and one of them is going to be a champion. So if that doesn't interest you right away, I just want to save you time right away. That's fine. If you're not interested in playing either of those builds, you can use this sort of build and this sort of build guide discussion to hopefully help you be informed about the economy and the meta and what other players might be playing in Path of Exile to keep an eye out for maybe what other players might identify as valuable. So that's something just as a word of wisdom on why maybe it's helpful to stay abreast of what's going on in the meta and different build guides, even if it's not going to be a build that you in particular are going to be playing or focusing on. So our first build is, of course, coming from the Champion, which the Champion tree right now in terms of popularity is only at 4% in terms of total popularity, total player popularity, according to PoE.Ninja. That being said, the vast majority of champions are playing Cyclone. That's just the vast majority of what a lot of melee classes are playing at this point during Legion League, and that's totally fine. At some point, I'm going to build my Earthquake character. Not sure whether or not it's going to be a true Earthquake jug, but anyway, we'll get to that bridge when we come to it. We'll cross that bridge. We'll break that bridge. We will valiantly assault that bridge when we come to it. Anyway, all that aside, here is an awesome champion Cycloner build that caught my eye. And the reason why it caught my eye wasn't simply because it was a champion Cycloner build. Like that's a dime a dozen, right? You throw Cyclone in, you make it your 6th link, and you go play any Ascendancy really right now, almost virtually any Ascendancy. And it'll probably be very, very enjoyable to play simply because of the updates to melee, quality of life, as well as Cyclone itself. That being said, one of the things that I have wanted to try out and mess around with, and I'm very interested to see how it performs, is Master of Metal since the Impale skills were added into the game. This is, as a mechanic, is very intriguing to me for a couple of reasons. One, because I tried it, Lancing Steel and Shattering Steel, when they first came out, and I tried it on a champion, and it was, goodness to gracious, awful. It was terrible. It was my worst league start decision that I have ever made, was to attempt those Impale skills on a league start. It was just terrible. It was really tough to get anything scaling early league on its own with a pure physical scaling build. And I also had terrible luck that league with drops. So those two factors being combined, I just had a really bad taste in my mouth for everything Impale. And so I wanted to give Impale another shot. And this particular Cyclone build looks great. So a couple of things here about the Ascendancy. First off, getting Master of Metal allows your Impales to hit for an additional 2 times. Now, depending on your math and your calculations, just take a look. This is simply what Impale reads. When an impaled enemy is hit, the Impale reflects 10% of the physical damage of the impaling hit to that enemy. Impales last naturally for 5 hits. But with Master of Metal, you can go up to 7 hits, which is a massive damage boost for anyone that's interested in dealing damage and is playing softcore this league, which is mostly all of us. So Master of Metal was something that was intriguing to me. But over here, you've also got Inspirational, which gives you Banner, Skills Reserve No Mana, 15% increased effective non-curse auras from your skills. When you create a banner, it gains 40% of the stages of your placed banner. You and your allies affected by your placed banners regenerate 0.1% of your maximum life per second for each stage, and you and nearby allies have 12% increased movement speed. So you just straight up get movement speed which is great. Anytime there's movement speed, that's great. But that, of course, is going to scale with Cyclone as you're cycloning around. Then you've got banner skills, which banner skills are another new thing that I wanted to try out. And so this particular build takes into account two awesome, relatively newish things into the Path of Exile meta, both Impale as well as banner skills. Beyond that, this is a champion build, which a lot of the times when I've thought about playing champion builds in the past, I've rushed over here to grab Fortitude, so that way you have Fortify. And this instead comes over to grab Worthy Foes, which gives you enemies taunted by you take 20% increased damage, which is in effect a multiplier. And then enemies taunted by you cannot evade attacks, which is really, really nice in terms of the quality of life of always hitting, along with Conqueror, which of course allows you to taunt enemies that you hit. So this entire ascendancy sounds awesome to play for Cyclone. Now the tree that this particular character and this particular player is following is indeed a Vol Pact tree. I am not a fan of Vol Pact in any way, shape, or form since it's been nerfed and changed from giving you instant regen to simply doubling your life leech per second. That's not really interesting to me. It's not really exciting. That being said, since I'm not playing hardcore and since I don't care about dying all that much, Vol Pact is an interesting choice depending on whether or not you would like to rely on the regeneration of inspirational from your banners from getting placed, or whether or not you care enough for that regen at all. So it's an interesting choice. There's some flexibility here. If you want to build this build around Vol Pact and just go life leech, you can do that. If you'd rather save the passive point and save on all of that and just say, you know what, I'm just going to depend on regen, that's an option for you as well. Both would be great options. Now, in terms of the damage on this puppy, what he can pump out, the average damage on max stages with this item configuration that he's got is 744,000. That's the average damage. The total DPS, however, you can see right over here is 14,687,000. I'm going to tell this to everybody right now. If you're a new player, these are not normal, healthy projections for total DPS unless you're able to invest lots and lots of currency into a character. This is a character with a ton of gear already equipped to him and with lots of good-looking gear on top of that. So he's got two jeweled foils that are relatively strong, both of them. He's dual-wielding them. And then he's got a bunch of just awesome gloves. He's got some awesome boots here. He's got some awesome amulet in terms of the crit strike chance and crit strike multi. And then his rings are ridiculously strong. So I'm just throwing this out here, right? Oh, and by the way, I think it's all of these jewels are ridiculously strong, right? Global fizz damage, crit multi, and then life. I'm not saying this isn't achievable. I'm just wanting to put this out there for those of you who are new players and who are concerned or maybe just enthusiastic about this build and are saying, Iron, oh, you showed that build and I'm going to go play it. And why isn't my tooltip DPS the same? This is why. It's because he's got insane gear built on his path of building. And you can see this. As soon as he takes off these jeweled foils and he just goes to, a regular leveling weapon, which is Dureso's Passion, he goes down from 14 million down to 6 million. Okay, so he halved his damage just by swapping those weapons out. So I just want to show that to you so that way, if you're wondering, sometimes I look at builds and I look at Path of Buildings and then I build a character and I go, this feels lackluster. And then I forgot to go and check the items. And why is it that it feels lackluster? Oh, sure, because I'm not, spending 10x worth of gear in every single slot. So just realize, take that into consideration whenever you're following anything like this. That being said, this tree focuses heavily on the Impale mechanic. The Impale mechanic is now pick-upable. It's now available on the tree in a couple of places. Over here with Forceful Skewering, this gives you 5% increased Impale effect, as well as 15% chance to impale enemies on attacks, along with some smaller nodes that are going to give you increased attack damage, as well as chance to impale. One of the reasons why he doesn't go and grab these chance to impales is because he's already min-maxed his chance to impale, so he doesn't need to spend these points to come over here and grab this. The next thing to notice is this Swift Skewering, which gives you increased attack physical damage, increased attack speed, and then chance to impale on hit with attacks, with a bunch of nodes that give you increased impale effect, which is really, really good because we want to be storing up as much damage as we can on each hit. Essentially, the concept of this build, in a nutshell, is to hit as many times as you possibly can with Cyclone for as large as you can to start to store those charges of your impale hits, and to maximize the number of Impale hits that you have by going champion. That's the goal of this particular build as we're looking at it. You can go ahead and leave us a comment down below if you've got any feedback for this particular build, or if you're playing a particular build that's similar to this. Love to hear any kind of feedback that you've got. The last thing to note about this particular build is he does come up and grab acrobatics. I am so confused as to why acrobatics has not gotten a hit with the Nerf bat. I'm not calling for one. I'm not saying it should happen. I'm just confused because GGG oftentimes hits things that's very popular with the Nerf bat. And both acrobatics and phase acrobatics have been very popular now for 3 leagues in a row, and they've gone untouched. Again, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying, GGG, please nerf these. I'm simply saying that they've been very strong for a while, and they're still worth going way out of the way to go and grab. A complaint about this particular build as we wrap up on this is a tree that is 123 out of 123, so this is a level 100 duelist. One of the things that I would choose to do if I was changing this up, depending on what level you are going on, I typically prioritize going out and getting life first on the tree if I don't have life on my gear. If I do have life on my gear, then I will typically go out and get damage on the tree. That's just how I usually balance things out, and the reason for that is because if I don't have life on my gear, then that means that I'm going to need to bolster that somehow. The passive tree is an easy way to do that through passive points in the story and through leveling through maps. Vice versa is true for damage. It's a little bit tougher to get the top end damage gear that you're needing to get, and so I feel like damage scales a lot harder once you get to the end game and once you get to maps and once you get to end game bossing, and so that's oftentimes where I'll put that on a backwards priority where I'm just going, hey, I want to conserve as much experience as I can get, so give me those defenses, whatever the defenses are in this build, give me those defenses first, and then I'll go get the damage as I continue to level. That's just my own process. Maybe you've got a different process, and that's totally fine. So that is our Impale Cyclone build, and of course the POB paste bin for this is down below in the video description. That is our first build that we're taking a look at today. Our second build that we are taking a look at today is another pretty meta build. It's the Essence Drain Contagion Trickster. Now, for those of you that are wondering, what's Essence Drain Trickster? Well, it is a DoT-based build that primarily scales its defensive layers off of evasion and dodge, whether that's dodge chance on attacks or dodge chance on spells, along with scaling a decent amount of life and potentially energy shield. There's a couple of different builds out there for ED Trickster right now. Really, I think we're in a time where we shouldn't call it ED Trickster anymore because it's not really Essence Drain that's making this build tick. Particularly for farming and interacting with the Legion mechanic. The thing that is really making this build tick is actually Contagion, and as Contagion interacts and spreads with the Legion mechanic, that's the thing that's really making this build incredibly popular, is the League mechanic. So I think that this particular build and this particular iteration of the build is attractive to me for a couple of reasons. First off, it's not a CI build. It's not a Chaos Inoculation build. So CI, for those of you who don't know what it is, maximum life becomes 1 and you become immune to chaos damage. I think that's fine. I think that's fantastic. There's a lot of different ways in which you can take chaos damage in Path of Exile at this present point in time. That being said, I have actually played this build. I've swapped over my League starter to this particular tree, following along pretty closely, making a few tweaks here and there, but following along pretty closely to this. And I don't get the sense at this point in time that chaos damage in any way, shape, or form justifies the amount of expense that is required to switch over to a CI and boosting the heck out of my energy shield. I just don't feel like that's a thing. I don't feel like it's needed. Maybe as I acquire more currency, I will do that. And that's one of the things that actually has attracted me to playing a Trickster early on this league, is the amount of flexibility that it's got. So this particular Trickster and this particular setup is intriguing because the tree is all over the place, right? And the reason why the tree is all over the place is because when you see chaos damage on the tree, you can just look, I'll zoom out here. You can see where chaos damage is on the tree. You got some chaos down here. You got some chaos, of course, on a couple of different ascendancies, but primarily on the tree, it's up in the top right, it's down towards the middle right, and then it's up in the top left. That's where chaos damage is actually at if you want to interact with it. And so that's one of the reasons why this tree goes all over the place. The other reason why this tree goes all over the place is because there's great defensive nodes to go and grab all over the tree. Again, I just mentioned this with our champion look, but of course acrobatics is here. I think acrobatics and phase acro are exceptional defenses. I think they are the single best defensive layer right now out of everything, right? If you just wanted to say, okay, what's the single best defensive mechanic? And I'm talking everything. I'm talking life. I'm talking CI. I'm talking energy shield. I'm talking armor. I just think not getting hit is the best thing in the game. Which is why I'm still so confused that they haven't nerfed it, because they nerfed the heck out of block chance and block back during Delve. That was last year that they nerfed block very heavily because they didn't want players delving very, very deep without risk of ever having to layer their defenses because they simply blocked everything that was coming in. And yet here we have an ability through dodge and through evasion to basically just not get hit by stuff. Yes, occasionally a big hit is going to get through, and I understand that there's eventually diminishing returns, and eventually you do get hit. I get that. But if I can not get hit for enough times that the things that do hit me aren't massive one-shots, that's fantastic. I've just mitigated the single biggest thing that kills people in Path of Exile nowadays, which is one-shots. So that's one of the things that attracted me to this build. Its flexibility as well as its defensive layers being very, very strong with acro and phase acro. The build is also incredibly flexible on the tree to come over and grab the Scion Life Wheel, which is an incredible amount of max HP that you can add to your build and make it very, very tanky. Now, zooming in on the Ascendancy choices for this particular build are to come up and grab Ghost Dance, to come over and grab Patient Reaper, to come over and grab Escape Artist once you've got your chest and your helm piece figured out, and then to come over and grab Prolonged Pain. Some people are grabbing Prolonged Pain ASAP. They'll just come down and they'll grab Patient Reaper and then Prolonged Pain with their first two Labyrinths. I think that's fine. That's totally fine. I think for a lot of players that I've chatted with who have been leveling and playing chaos-based DoT builds, whether that's Contagion, whether that's Bane, whether that's Essence Drain, a lot of folks, or Blight, a lot of folks that I've talked to in our guild and that I've traded with throughout the league thus far that are playing Tricksters, have actually talked about just how ridiculous the damage is interacting both with the league mechanic, but also just with regular monsters. Like, this build is insane with the clear speed that it's got. Its bossing ability is actually pretty strong when you consider a lot of bosses actually have energy shield throughout Path of Exile, and chaos damage just bypasses energy shield, so who cares, right? So there's a lot of different flexible options that are available around Trickster, whether you want to max out the hit from Essence Drain, whether or not you want to max out Bane and your curses, whether or not you want to play Soul Rend and your projectile based, whether or not you want to simply spread and interact with the Legion mechanic, which is so satisfying. I think the only other satisfying thing, like the only other thing that comes close in terms of the visceral experience of seeing your Contagion proliferate out through a Legion monolith encounter, the only thing that comes close in my Path of Exile experience are two things. One, jumping away from a pack with Earthquake explosions, which those of you that are going to, rag on that, that's fine. Earthquake is just a personal favorite for me. So I really enjoy that feeling of jumping away from a pack as it explodes in the background. I think that's awesome. And Essence Drain, Contagion, Trickster basically has that, right? You're not jumping away from the pack and it's exploding from Earthquake, but you're essentially running by, like waving and doing a drive-by curse. You're just driving by and casting Contagion ED, and boom, there they go. And you're running away. You're speeding away as your speeder Trickster boy, as they're all dying right behind you. And it feels really, really great because the damage on this guy is really, really great. I think the only other thing besides Earthquake that even comes close is the Shatter effect from Herald of Ice. And of course, for any of you that have played Magic Find builds, it feels great. Nonetheless, this particular build, I think, comes close to feeling that way. When you interact with a monolith while you're playing an Essence Drain, Contagion, Bane, Soul Rend, Blight character, it feels great. Now, one of the things that is an option on this Ascendancy that I wanted to point out, I've talked with a couple of different people that have also done this as a divergent option. You can go with Swift Killer to give yourself additional power charges and frenzy charges, and it's really, really nice because if you're using Blight in your setup in any way, shape, or form, then that means you've got a channeling skill built in, and that means that you can, of course, pick up frenzy and power charges. Those of you who don't think Frenzy and Power Charges are powerful, give it a shot. I just want to recommend, give it a shot. Those of you that haven't tried out Swift Killer with this, I'm actually still spec'd into Swift Killer, and I've actually spec'd out of it once already before just to try it, and I spec'd back into Swift Killer because I think it's really, really great to just have that instant feel for your Frenzy charges. Now, your power charges, you're not really critting on anything for a dot-based build, so it really, really doesn't matter. That being said, it is still an increase in damage because you've got 5% increased damage per Frenzy and 5% increased damage per power charge. You don't have to generate these either simply from channeling. You can just rely on the kill mechanic, and because Contagion kills everything on the screen plus multiple screens away, you're always going to be at max power and frenzy charges, which is really, really nice to have as a quality of life for early damage. I think it's great as you are looking at different options for itemization to consider, again, going either damage heavy or life and defenses heavy early on the tree. Because every path that you take on this tree is really geared towards either damage or defenses, I would just recommend as you are leveling and playing through this build that you invest heavily in your itemization as you play through this build. In other words, if you are looking at, say, spending the next 10 levels to come and get phase acrobatics, or the next 20 levels to come all the way down and to grab the Constitution life wheel down by Scion and Marauder, or conversely are going to spend the next 10 levels to come all the way up to grab Corruption, or to come all the way over and grab Atrophy, that's fine. If you're going to be spending a bunch of time spending passive points going to grab these things that are relatively distant from one another, that's fine. Spend your currency on gear that is going to bolster whatever area it is that you are not bolstering through your passive tree. So when you're looking at itemization for this particular build, you've got dual-wielding crystal wands. These are some amazing wands. The stats that most matter on these wands are the non-ailment chaos damage and, of course, just base spell damage that are included. You can also have the 5% of non-chaos damage as extra chaos damage on there, but most of your damage is chaos, so it's really not that big of a deal. Over here, his second wand, of course, has got that really important roll, which is 18% to non-ailment chaos damage over time multiplier. This is a dot-based build, and so anything that you can get that can scale that dot-based abilities is really, really strong. This particular player, following him on his PoE.Ninja profile, this particular player is all the way up to level 94 in Hardcore Legion League. So for those of you that are wondering, hey, how safe is this build? How strong is this build in terms of the content that it can take on? He's playing in Hardcore Legion League, and he's up to level 94. He's doing well. And you can see here from his build, yes, he's got some rares that are going to be a little bit pricey, but he's using things like Itziri's Step. He's using an Essence Worm in order to store his Malevolence aura, and then he's using a Clear Mind as well as a Spreading Rot Jewel. So not necessarily terribly expensive for the build. In terms of the flasks, it's relatively cheap. One of the flasks upgrades that I would recommend for you is, of course, the Witchfire Brew Flask, which, for those of you that are unsure what is the Witchfire Brew Flask, Witchfire Brew gives you these couple of things. First off, it grants you increased damage over time during the flask effect, and it has a base flask lasting effect of 6 seconds, which is really, really nice. That actually might be incorrect in Path of Building. I want to say it's 5 seconds on the live version. But then it also grants level 21 Despair Curse just whenever you use the flask. That's really, really nice to have a level 21 Despair as an aura. It's not a blasphemy that you have to reserve mana for, which means you can use something like Clear Mind, which gives you a whole bunch of additional spell damage while none of your mana is reserved. That's a really, really neat combo, essentially, to have. You don't have to worry about reserving a bunch of mana for an aura around you with blasphemy, but you're always going to have charges because you're running around a map so fast, killing everything. You're always going to have charges, so you can always have that up. And everything's going to be cursed near you anyway. So yeah, I almost want to call this the drive-by build because it really feels that way. I feel like when I'm playing this build in Softcore Legion League, I'm just flying past packs and just kind of waving and popping Contagions off every once in a while, throwing a Bane here and there, every once in a while throwing Blight or Vol Blight if there's a particularly tough rare, especially a Legion rare, or, you know, every once in a while throwing a Bane in there to curse with Despair. But as soon as I got that Witchfire Brew, I was like, hey, I don't need to worry about casting Bane anymore. Anyway, it's just a great, really, really fun, really, really flexible build that you can mess around with in terms of its tree, in terms of its itemization, and in terms of its ascendancy. because there are these wonderful options going between Prolonged Pain versus going Swift Killer. I've even seen some people go for Weave the Arcane, just so that way they've always got mana available for their movement skill, as well as, of course, taking some additional damage over time for mana. So there's lots of different ways to build this guy. I do like that he's Mind Over Matter, which is just really, really nice. The one thing that I found that maybe Weave the Arcane allows you to do when you go MOM that I've noticed is that when I do take damage, and again, you're rarely hit. You are so rarely hit because of phase acro and all the evasion that you've got. But when you do get hit, the one thing that is really nice to have if you go Weave the Arcane is that you can still use your movement skill, your Flame Dash, your Shield Charge to get out of the way. That is somewhat annoying when you are taking damage on an MOM build and you run out of mana, such that you can't get out of a hairy scenario. The areas that I've noticed this most happening is, of course, the Temple of Atsuatl, when you've got a bunch of Chaos Spitters that all spawn in a pack and shoot you all at the same time, right when you spawn into an Alva incursion. That's a great way to die. And maybe that's a motivation. If you just want to farm temples, maybe that's a reason to go CI. Again, this build is incredibly flexible, and you can go CI with just a couple of changes and a couple of unique jewels in place of a couple of spots on the skill tree. So those are our two builds that we're going to show off right now for Path of Exile Legion League, the Champion Cyclone Impale build and the Essence Drain. It shouldn't be called Essence Drain. The Contagion Trickster, because that's really what it's all about. It's all about Contagion. Anyway, leave us a comment down below about what builds you've been playing and what builds you've been enjoying, and maybe what builds you're looking forward to trying out during Path of Exile 3.7 Legion League. I hope today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Maybe while you're playing one of these two builds. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.